Hey guys, welcome back to the lectures on writing for orchestral forces. In this one we're going to be taking a look at the brass section for each piece, and as we go along we'll be combining them with the strings to see how they fit in. Then we'll listen to them separately and pick them apart. Okay, so there's not really much to say about the introduction for the uplifting version. I'm simply using a crescendo at the very end of it to add some power. Let's look at the voicing of it quickly. I have the trumpets and the horns playing up the top here, about mid-register, and the low brass are playing the bass notes. Above C3 is a really good area to start putting notes closer together in chords because there's more room for them to speak out. Notice how below C2 we have our notes an octave apart. I wouldn't actually have them any closer than that unless it was a really rare occasion, because as I said, we need to leave room for everything else that's happening. Originally, I had a sus chord in the strings, but I quite like adding a third in anyway. In this case, it's a B natural. I only have it in the horns and the trombones though, and it's only on B2. Any higher, it would be a bit overpowering, and any lower, the voicing would sort of mess up the chord a bit. So here's what the brass sound like on their own. Moving on to the uplifting mid section. So in orchestral trailer music, it's very common to just start out with the strings and have a bit of brass here and there until the end when you go all the way out, like in this example. Very simply, it's just brass chords. So I have the horns playing chords at the top. I also have trombones playing them as well. And then the low brass are doing what they've been doing before, playing the bass notes. So on their own, this is what they sound like. So we're just fattening up the chords, nothing too harsh, just something nice and gentle but warm. So if you remember, we had a new chord progression here, or not a new one, just one that's more obvious now, to signify a change. We have the same format with the brass. The lows are playing the bass, trombones are playing chords, but now we have horns and trumpets playing the melody. And at the end, we're bringing back that crescendo chord from the end of the intro, this time without the B, and it will take us to the end of our midsection and prepare us for the back end of the track. So the brass all together. Moving on to the back end of the track. So we're going to have a fair bit of doubling between the sections in this part of the track. We've got the horns and the trumpets playing the same melody as the strings, and the rest of the brass again doing what they've been doing before. And I don't think I mentioned this before, we've just changed the chord progression slightly. So before we had A minor, C major, E minor, but now we've added an F major onto the end as well. Just a nice little bit of variety there. And that will then take us to the uplifting back end too. So again, we've got the horns and the trumpets playing the melody, except the trumpets this time are playing an octave higher. However, this time, what I like to do in uplifting is to have one trumpet on the melody and then two more playing chordal sort of version of the melody. So this is a really good technique to use, especially if you're writing for a live orchestra. The first trumpet playing within this range is usually when it's at its most powerful, so it's really going to stick out in the mix. And as I said before, the trombones are playing the chords, a really good instrument for the chords because they've got a good mix of high end and low end in them. The low brass are again playing the bass notes, a fun life for them indeed. That about covers the uplifting brass, so let's move on to the dark brass. I don't actually have any brass in the first half of the intro, so we're going to go straight on to the second half of the intro. Okay, so there is in general a lot less brass in this track, and I will explain why soon. For now though, I'm happy with the power of the low brass for this intro, and if you're writing something like this, it's up to you whether you double it with like an ensemble patch or something to make it fatter, or if you want to just leave it as it is and save that sort of sound for the second half of the track more towards the end. So again, we bring things down dynamically for the midsection, which is why I don't have any brass here. They are the main powerhouse of the orchestra, so we're going to save the brutality of them for later on, starting at the second half of the midsection. So if you remember from the strings lecture, we had the strings playing. And now we have it in the brass in the second half of the midsection. Low brass again, surprise, surprise, playing the bass notes. And that takes us to the back end. This is where the brass really come out in full force. We don't want too much going on beforehand because otherwise it's going to get really tiring on the ears eventually. And usually I have them playing the same thing with slight developments as we go along. So as you can hear, there's still the string melody going on and the brass are also playing it, but with a slight development. The developed version is actually just one note per 2 bars. So instead of having this C sharp held on all the way throughout until the C, we're doing it for two beats, and then we're adding in an E and an F sharp in between. Same as before, the trumpets over here will be playing up the register. I've basically repeated the first half of this second part of the back end over here. And again, like the uplifting version, I've added the extended chord sequence at the end. Compared to the uplifting track with the brass, there is a lot less chordal movement other than the trombones, which are only playing sparse chords in the final rise of the back end. All the other brass are playing the bass line or the melody in octaves. And that's about it for brass, so things to remember. Use them for power mainly, but as I said, you can get creative. Maybe a track that you're doing will call for some gentle brass at some point. Are they necessary during your intro, or do you have other ideas that don't require them? Voice them correctly, but don't underestimate the power of them when they're playing in octaves, like in this dark example we just listened to. And finally, don't underestimate simplicity, and equally don't overestimate complexity. So understanding both of these will be the difference to making a licensable track. Alright, that about wraps up this lecture on brass. The next lecture will be relatively short as we're looking at choir. So I will see you then.